Hello everyone, this is Dre. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I play video games while I tell you a true crime story. This is a story about abuse, rape, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. This story is about Gertrude Baniszewski, one of America's most notorious torture moms. In a home in Indiana, Gertrude was the ringleader in the torture of a teenage girl named Sylvia Likens. Gertrude was born in September of 1929, only 1 month into the Great Depression. Gertrude was the third of 6 children. Her father leaned on alcohol for relief from stress. Gertrude's mother was loving to all of her children except Gertrude. As a result, her siblings also rejected her. However, she was her father's favorite. This relationship stamped resentment from the rest of the family. She didn't care. Her father's love was enough for her. When she was 11, her father became ill. He collapsed beside her. Her mother rushed in and yelled at Gertrude, "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Gertrude said. But it was too late. Her father was dead. She was so traumatized by this, she started to have nightmares. She didn't have anyone anymore. Her mother blamed her for his death. When she would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, instead of comforting her, her mother would scold her for waking up her siblings. Gertrude would also get bullied at school, and she started to miss a lot of it. Even her mom would start rumors about her. Her mom would say she was running around with boys. So she turned to boys and men. She started to live up to the rumors. It was not only a way to get affection, and a way to get away from home. At age 16, she married a deputy, John Baniszewski, and none of her family even cared to attend the ceremony. John was excited about married life. He had heard all these rumors about Gertrude and was excited he would have her all to himself. But soon he realized that they were all simply rumors, and she was not the expert in the bedroom as he imagined. She also was not a good homemaker. She wouldn't cook well or keep the house clean. She tried to be a good wife. 3 years into the marriage, she gave birth to their daughter Paula. Then she had another daughter named Stephanie. Gertrude was diagnosed with neuroticism. Due to her upbringing and increased stress, psychiatrists would now consider her bipolar and borderline personality disorder. She was always tense. She was a good mother. She gave them all her time and attention. She later gave birth to their son Johnny and then a third daughter Marie. Her husband John was disappointed with her as a wife. She was always nagging him about money and drinking. He would beat her. She thought abuse was just another thing a wife was supposed to endure from her husband. She would constantly cover up bruises. After all, he was a policeman. She later asked him for a divorce after 10 years together. Gertrude had 4 kids and no money. All she wanted was love. She married Edward Guthrie. She thought he was very different from John. However, he also had a problem with alcohol. He was unemployed, and he also disliked children. She would do odd jobs for neighbors, and they live off child support from John. One day, Edward hit one of the children, which caused things to become tense between him and Gertrude. He found a job, and since he no longer needed to depend on her financially, he filed for divorce. Gertrude felt it was easier to get by without having to support Edward's drinking problem anyway. She was lonely, so she married John again. She was now a better housewife at this point. He was much happier with her. She became pregnant with their 5th child but suffered from a miscarriage. She was devastated. She fell into deep depression and did not keep up with cooking and cleaning. John's abuse did not help this. She became pregnant again and miscarried again, then finally gave birth to a 5th and 6th child. Later, John became tired of their life together and he filed for divorce. She started to become abusive to her children. This was the start of something really dark. At 36 years old, she then met Dennis Lee Wright. He was about 19 or 20 years old. She liked him since he was less experienced. She wanted to marry him. However, even though he began living with Gertrude, he was still married to another woman, and he too had a drinking problem. He would financially support her and the children, and she used sex to her advantage. She was able to control him. She claimed to be pregnant with their 7th child. He started to punch her in the face and abdomen. He did not want her to have his child. She miscarried the next day. He would burn her with his cigarettes. However, to her, this crossed the line. They would pretend things were fine, but they both were planning to flee from the relationship. She became pregnant again and hid it from him. She named the 7th child after him, Dennis Wright Jr. When she came home from the hospital, Dennis Sr. was gone, and her daughter Paula was also left town with some man to Kentucky. Lester and Betty Likens, another family up the street, had issues of their own. They married in 1944. They had moved about 19 times due to Lester being unable to hold a job. Betty separated from her husband in 1965. She told her daughters Sylvia and Jenny they were leaving. The mother had no idea where they would go, but the 3 of them got onto a bus and went to a store. But the mother, Betty, was caught shoplifting. Sylvia and Jenny were on their own. Sylvia was the oldest sister. She would do her best to include her sister Jenny in everything that she did. They later met up with their friend Darlene. Darlene introduced them to Paula Baniszewski. Paula admitted she was pregnant at the age of 17. When the girls met Paula's mother, Gertrude, they felt sorry for her. The house was dirty and money was scarce. Paula had taken an authority role in the home. Paula asked Gertrude if Jenny and Sylvia could stay for the night, and they did. There was a knock at the door later that day. It was Jenny and Sylvia's father. He told them he was going back on the road for work, and he wanted to take their mother Betty with him and needed someone to look after Jenny and Sylvia while he and his wife went away. Gertrude saw this as a way to make money. She would charge $20 per week for the girls to stay with her. Today, this would be about $150. The girls seemed to be happy about this. Lester filled Betty in on the plan. They agreed to let the girls stay with Gertrude. He also told Gertrude to use a firm hand when disciplining his daughters. Little did he know what this would lead to. The first week went fine. The girls helped Gertrude around the house. There was only one spoon for all of them to share. There were more children than beds. Gertrude was always stressed out. Gertrude was unhappy when Lester did not pay on time. She slapped the girls, saying she took care of them for free. The money came early the next morning. Gertrude would use all the money from Lester on cigarettes and her medications. Betty and Lester came to visit, and the girls did not mention their living situation or the treatment they were receiving from Gertrude. Gertrude felt the girls needed to be punished for making her children look bad. She used a black leather belt, 1/4-inch thick wooden paddle on their backsides, and on Sylvia on the back of her head. When Gertrude was tired, she gave Paula the paddle, who did not have a problem hitting them. Gertrude felt that she needed to keep up appearances, so she would send all the children to church every Sunday. One Sunday, Paula had a cast on her wrist and bragged that she broke it trying to kill Sylvia by punching her in the jaw so hard. Paula said Sylvia had called her mother a nasty name, but there was no proof needed. All of them would accuse Sylvia of either saying something, stealing something, doing something, so she would get paddled. She would constantly get slapped or paddled. Gertrude and Paula, joined by a neighbor kid, Randy, took turns loading a hot dog with various spices and forced Sylvia to eat it. She tried to get away, but Gertrude jammed it into her mouth down her throat. Sylvia was crying, and Gertrude kept shoving it in her throat. Gertrude forced her to eat all of it, even the pieces she regurgitated. Jenny was not safe from Gertrude and Paula's abuse, but they were always focused on Sylvia. Sylvia was pretty and boys liked her, and Paula was her mother's sidekick. Paula was in denial of her pregnancy still. One day, Gertrude was talking with the girls about boys. Things almost seemed normal. She asked Sylvia if she had ever done anything with the boy, and she said yes, she had kissed a boy, and one time she let a boy touch her body. All of a sudden, Gertrude turned very angry over this. She then felt Sylvia deserved to be punished. She told her she was ruined. She called her a whore and started to stomp on her and kick her. They convinced Sylvia she was pregnant and that she needed to start to lose weight. Sylvia and Jenny did not report any mistreatment to their parents when they would come to visit. The girls were too afraid to speak up. They were scared of what Gertrude might do to them if she found out. Sylvia met a boy at school. She had told the boy that Gertrude's daughter would go to bed with him for a price. The next time he saw one of the daughters, Stephanie, he asked her how much. And when he told her Sylvia is the one who said she would, she rushed home to find Sylvia and punched her in the face. Sylvia admitted to it and apologized. Hoy, Stephanie's boyfriend, also found out, and he went over and started to beat up Sylvia. He started to bang her head against the wall, flipped her onto her back. Gertrude also helped beat Sylvia for this. Whenever Gertrude got angry, she would beat Sylvia. Gertrude started to call Coy over and tell him that Sylvia was insulting Stephanie so that he would help Gertrude beat Sylvia. Stephanie had to stay home from school because she started randomly fainting. Gertrude asked the reverend from the church to come to the house and pray for Stephanie. Gertrude did her best to get sympathy from him. She gave him a whole sob story. She said Sylvia was causing her problems She said she was forced to spank Sylvia and Paula had to help her. She said Sylvia was making advances on older men and had been sneaking out at night. He asked to speak with Sylvia. She knew she couldn't allow that. Jenny also backed up Gertrude and her story and said that Sylvia would act badly. He prayed for Sylvia before leaving. Gertrude not only hated Sylvia, but she also turned most of her children against her too. Gertrude would tell the kids in the neighborhood that Sylvia was saying lies about them. This would cause the kids to beat up Sylvia also. Beatings became almost a game. Everybody would jump in punching, flipping, and even branding Sylvia. They said everybody would have fun with Sylvia. Even Jenny was forced to join in on the beatings. Sometimes up to 10 kids at a time would hurt Sylvia. They would put out cigarettes on her, and the only adult in the house, Gertrude, would not only allow this, but condone it. Stephanie was the closest friend that Sylvia had. She would always try to save Sylvia from some of these beatings. Not long after, Gertrude would turn Stephanie against Sylvia too. At night, Sylvia would sneak out to dig through trash cans for something to eat. They were starving her. One night, she came home and Gertrude and a group of boys were waiting for her. Gertrude made her strip naked, and Gertrude told Sylvia she was a whore and told her she needed to give the boys a show. She knew it was her fault for sneaking out, but Gertrude made her insert a glass bottle into her body. All the boys were yelling in excitement. Gertrude said Sylvia needed to do something more amusing. Gertrude then shoved the bottle in further. Stephanie was infuriated with Sylvia. She felt Sylvia was wrong for doing this. Stephanie slapped her. Gertrude yanked the bottle out. There was a pool of blood on the floor. Gertrude was the cool adult in the neighborhood. She would keep the game of abuse going on Sylvia. She was glad she had so many kids to jump in. Sylvia now spent every moment scared. Lack of food, lack of sleep, and constant beatings. She didn't want to run away and leave her sister Jenny though. Lester and Betty came to visit the girls, and they said they'd be back home in about 3 weeks. The girls had been there 3 months now, so what was 3 more weeks? Sylvia felt the end of her nightmare was finally near. Some neighbors had seen Sylvia eating from trash cans, and Gertrude made sure to keep Sylvia from leaving the house. They had new next-door neighbors, the Vermillions. They needed a full-time babysitter, and they heard that Gertrude was known for watching several children. Miss Vermillion went to Gertrude's home to see if she could leave her children there. Miss Vermillion found the home filthy and loud with children. Miss Vermillion saw Sylvia's bruised face. She asked Sylvia how she got the black eye. Sylvia didn't answer. Gertrude yelled at Sylvia to leave the room. She said she hated her. Paula got steaming water from the sink and threw it at Sylvia's face. Miss Vermillion watched in horror. No one else in the home reacted to this. Miss Vermillion thought whatever Sylvia did to deserve this, it must have been really bad. Gertrude drank her cup of coffee like nothing. She yelled at Sylvia to get out of her sight. She told Miss Vermillion Sylvia was pregnant. Miss Vermillion found a different babysitter for her own children. Thank goodness. The next time Miss Vermillion visited, she saw Sylvia in an even worse condition. Every part of her body was bruised and either still had a black eye or a new one. Her lip was bleeding, and Paula came in and told her Sylvia needed to be beaten because she was nothing but trouble. Then Paula started to beat Sylvia with the belt in the next room. Gertrude started to tell Miss Vermillion that Sylvia was a thief and she had to force Sylvia to quit school. Robert Hamlin was the other next door neighbor. One day he headed to their door because he was missing some items from his house. The kids had a reputation for mischief. Gertrude ended up calling the police and they took her side. The Vermillions saw this play out. Gertrude lied and said Hamlin was inside her house stealing things. The Vermillions told the police the truth. Why they wouldn't mention Sylvia's abuse is unknown. The Reverend would return to the house for spiritual support, but Gertrude turned everything on Sylvia again. She said Sylvia was lying saying Paula was pregnant, even though she was. Before leaving, he prayed for Sylvia again. One of the frequent visitors of the home was Mike Monroe. His mother was concerned he had been visiting the home often, and she felt she needed to go check it out. She saw this awful home the 9 children were living in, and Sylvia covered in bruises. She ended up calling the police. Gertrude kept her composure when a nurse from school came over. She was a public health nurse. She asked to see the children. The nurse wanted Gertrude to cooperate. She asked if any of the children were sick. She stated she received a phone call that one of the children had open sores. Gertrude said no, none of the children do. They're fine. Then Gertrude said, oh, I know who you're looking for. You're looking for Sylvia. She has sores all over her body because she won't keep herself clean. She's a prostitute and runs all over the neighborhood with boys. She's a whore. Paula then jumped in, adding more to the story. Gertrude said Sylvia was no longer in the home and she had to kick her out. It was simple. If Sylvia wasn't there was no reason for the nurse to stay, so she left. Jenny wrote a secret note describing the abuse. She was scared of getting caught, but was worried that Sylvia couldn't take any more abuse. Jenny was able to get the note to her oldest sister, Diana. Diana felt that Jenny was over-exaggerating, but the note was so specific that Diana felt maybe there was a small truth to it. Sylvia was now forced to stay in the basement. Her kidneys were so damaged and she was unable to keep her continence. She made Sylvia lay on the floor of the basement naked. Gertrude would fill the bathtub with scorching hot water and they would dump Sylvia into it. Then Paul and the boys would throw salt into Sylvia's wounds. When Sylvia would pass out from the pain, Gertrude would slap her across the face with a paddle, and then they would burn Sylvia with cigarettes, irons, or whatever else they could find. During the final weeks of Sylvia's life, Gertrude remembered she needed to punish Sylvia some more. They fed Sylvia the contents of Dennis Jr.'s diaper and gave her urine to drink. Sylvia was very ill, but her incontinence just got worse. Gertrude told her she can earn her way back upstairs if she could hold in her urine. Gertrude made Sylvia do another glass bottle show when she was unable to control her bladder. Ricky Hobbs, another youth from the neighborhood, was a frequent visitor of Gertrude. He was ready and willing to do anything that Gertrude asked. She created a new game. She called Sylvia upstairs. Gertrude asked if Ricky knew how to put on a tattoo. He said yes. One of Gertrude's daughters handed her a needle. Gertrude ordered Sylvia to undress and tore off Sylvia's clothes. She told Ricky to carve "I am a prostitute" onto Sylvia's skin. Sylvia was so dehydrated and unable to cry. They continued to brand Sylvia with a heated up crowbar. Gertrude was happy with the result. She told Sylvia, "No man would marry you now." She got her regular beating after that. Sylvia told Jenny she thought she was gonna die. Jenny said, "Please don't die." Gertrude was trying to think of a plan. Sylvia tried to escape, but Gertrude dragged her back. Gertrude gave Sylvia a piece of toast because she felt she was gonna die. When she couldn't eat, Gertrude beat her with a metal curtain rod. She felt, well, if she's gonna die, then she needs to direct the blame somewhere else. She thought she needed to clean Sylvia up. They covered Sylvia's limp body with laundry detergent. They then used a garden hose to wash all the filth off Sylvia. She was living in her own filth now. She was unable to control her bowel movements. Sylvia stopped moving. They could not detect her breathing anymore. Ricky was able to detect faint breathing. So then they ran a warm bath and they were trying to carry her up the stairs, but since she was wet, she slipped from their arms and banged her head on the steps. Now she was almost unconscious. They let Sylvia rest in warm water. She said she wished her daddy was there. They laid her on the bed. Gertrude was yelling, "She's faking it." And she then threw a book at Sylvia's head. Her breathing stopped entirely. It was finally over. It was Ricky who called the police. He rushed to a gas station. By the time the police arrived, Sylvia was dead. Gertrude pretended to be a concerned caregiver and gave the police the same story about Sylvia and her having sex parties. She said she left with a group of juvenile delinquents, and after they had their way with her, they dumped her in Gertrude's front yard half naked. Gertrude said Sylvia handed her a note addressed to her parents, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Likens," saying she went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and when they got what they wanted with her, they left sores all over her body, and they beat her up and put on her stomach, "I am a prostitute and proud of it. I have also caused Gertie to be a nervous wreck. I couldn't do anything around the house." As strange as it was, this is all the police had to go on. Everyone in the house backed up the same story. They didn't even investigate the note very well. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Likens. Like, you don't write that to your parents. Jenny was frightened and went along with Gertrude's story. But before the police left, Jenny whispered to the policeman to get her out of there. Jenny went to stay with her sister Diana. The truth finally comes out. The body of this murdered teenager was nothing like the coroner has ever seen before. There was cuts, bruises, burns. Sylvia had bitten a hole through her own lips. Malnutrition was evident, and her bones were prominent through her skin. Her organs were in a bad state. The incident with the glass bottle had not been evident at this time. Ricky was taken down to headquarters. He admitted to taking part in the beatings, the tattooing, and the branding. He told them it was all due to Gertrude's orders. Gertrude was then questioned. She claimed she was too weak and didn't know what the children were doing to Sylvia. She continued to deny everything. Then she said she knew what was happening but was too weak to put a stop or partake in it. She said she tried to help Sylvia and put alcohol on her wounds and nurse her. She admitted to making Sylvia sleep in the basement because she kept wetting the bed. She also said she did tell Johnny to get some shit and make her eat it when they fed her contents of the diaper. She blamed Coy and Paula. Paula made a confession about hitting Sylvia so hard that she broke her own wrist. Coy made a list of the neighborhood kids who also took part in the beatings. The day before Sylvia's funeral, police arrested other kids. This was such an unusual case, like never seen before. At this time in Indiana, a conviction of murder meant the death penalty. Gertrude's youngest children were placed into foster homes. All of the defendants were placed on trial at the same time. They were all denied bail. They brought in several neighborhood kids as witnesses. They spoke of the bottle incident and other beatings. Throughout the case, everyone wondered why Sylvia wouldn't fight back. Jenny was pressed as to why she wouldn't tell anyone what was happening. They kept asking how she could allow these things to happen to her sister. She said she was scared. She said Gertrude told her that if she told on them, that she would get the same treatment as Sylvia. Gertrude's lawyer tried to paint her as insane. Her torture was planned, and she tried to protect herself throughout. She was not insane. She was a cruel lady. Her mistreatment was calculated. She was found guilty of first-degree murder, Paula of second-degree murder. Both of them were sentenced to life in prison. However, Gertrude was released on parole in 1985, and Paula was released in 1972. Johnny, Ricky, and Coy were found guilty of manslaughter and would serve less than 2 years. Stephanie got her charges dropped. At last, the tormentors were put away. Jenny was adopted by the prosecutor's family informally. She finally had some stability. After Gertrude was released, she changed her name to Nadine von Fossen. She never took complete responsibility of Sylvia's death. She blamed it on her medications. She lived in Iowa until 1990 when she died of lung cancer. Paula also took on new identity when she was released, and she was working as a school counselor aide for 14 years in Iowa. She had married and had 2 children. The baby she had when she was awaiting trial was adopted. She was fired in 2012 when the school finally learned her true identity. How sad that Sylvia and Jenny ended up with Gertrude instead of a nice family, like the one Jenny finally ended up with. This is such a sad case. It makes you angry. It's so unfortunate that there were so many opportunities for someone to speak up and yet no one did. There is now Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center in Indiana. It was created with the objective to assist child victims of abuse and neglect. Laws have changed in Indiana because of this case. If a member of the public suspects a child is suffering from abuse, they have a legal obligation to report it. If you suspect any abuse, report it, because simply it's the right thing to do. Again, this is Dre. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. I would really appreciate it, and see you guys next time.